Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast with Blaha. And today we're having Greek yogurt, frozen cherries, and natural peanut butter. All right, let's talk about RPE. I've been saying for a year now, I prefer to program my clients off percentages. And that's not always perfect. There are limitations with percentages. And I do it because it allows me to have more direct control over the amount of effort they exert. Because what I found at a certain time, at some of my lifters would stall and they weren't making progress. And I was letting them RPE some of their supplemental lifts, right? Well, we didn't do RPE, we did reps in reserve. I don't like the RPE scale. I think it's stupid. I think the actual concept of the scale is dumb. People say, no, it's not, because 10 means no reps in reserve, 9 means 1 rep in reserve. Okay, why don't you just do reps in reserve then? And we come over to that point of RPE is useless if you use anything less than 8. It becomes stupid. Like why would you even start programming 3 reps in reserve for it? What? Just get out of the gym, go home. Unless you were doing Olympic lifts for technique work, training like that doesn't even make sense, right? It's called fuck-around-itis. So I've warmed to the idea of reps in reserve. But the reason I dropped it is I had lifters who I was prescribing things like glute bridges and good mornings. All right, and this is, again, well over a year ago. This is like a year and a half ago at this point. Because even the videos you guys see coming up where I'm still discussing percentages, those videos are a year old by the time they got here. I've been trying to work through all of last year's videos and get them, because they were just starting to accumulate those old informative videos, trying to get rid of them. So what I found was that they were sandbagging. And so what I had to start doing was prescribing percentages of the big lifts. Now, fortunately, since my lifters max out every week because we run conjugate, we always know what their max bench is. We know what their max conventional, their max sumo, their max box squat, all these, we know what they are. We test them all the time. I started having to look at ratios and say, okay, what we need for a lifter is a baseline. They need to be able to do at least 50% of their box squat for 10 reps on a good morning and work towards 70%. Okay. On a glute bridge, they need to be able to do at least 70% of their max deadlift for 10. And ideally, if their glute weakness is fixed and their glutes are not limiting their deadlift anymore, they need to be at 85% of their deadlift for 10. And I had to start doing this. Same thing with rowing. My guys who would be sandbagging their rows, I would be like, oh, just take your rows to good form 1 rep in reserve. And I let them pick their own weights. And all of a sudden, I got lifters doing 50% of their bench press on pin leg rows for 10 rep sets. And I've kind of said they need to be equally strong. Right? A power good morning should be as strong as your box squat. And in the perfect world, as you catch your back squat, your rows should be as strong as your bench, especially when you're getting into the closer grips where we can move more weight on the pin leg row. It should be as strong as your bench press, maybe stronger. Okay. Glute bridge should be a lot stronger than your deadlift. It should be the strongest lift you do. You should be able to move more weight on a glute bridge than just about any other lift you can come up with, other than like an above the knee rack pull. And my lifters were sandbagging. I started working off percentages. Then I started programming like, well, if I'm going to do these off percentages, we might as well do all the rep work off percentages. Or back off work. But the problem is I stopped doing back off work other than bench. As eventually I found all of my lifters did better, needed less deloads if we stuck with just speed boxes and speed pulls and maxes for squats and deadlifts. And we did supplemental work. Because I started dividing my lifters into groups and seeing how beat up they got versus how quickly their maxes went up. My lifters who built all the muscle for those off of supplemental lifts, and we didn't do a lot of squatting and deadlifting, we just did speed work, which is all percentages. They just did better. They didn't get as fatigued all the time, and they made just as good a progress. It's not saying they didn't make good progress doing them, but they were just too beat up. My lifters were more fatigued. But then since I started cutting that out, we kind of come back to reps and reserve, didn't we? As we're doing single leg exercises, we don't have percentages of your squat for this. We're getting to pull-ups, chin-ups, dips. I mean, these body weight movements, we are not plugging percentages of our maxes in on weighted body weight exercises. They would get too complex. And I started getting to a point where most of my lifts, a lot of these lifts, we can't really prescribe percentages for. We have to go back to reps in reserve. And I like my lifters to do 1 rep in reserve. So what I started finding is that you just have to force lifters to be honest. Right? There's got to be accountability with this stuff. And instead of waiting, I started asking them, how much weight are you using? What are you using on these? I want to know in their notes every week, and when they send some footage, how much weight were you doing those dumbbell presses with? How much weight are you doing your other lifts with? And what I found, I could start trusting more of these lifters to do this. It was the big intimidating movements. It was stuff that scares people, like good mornings, that really forced me to do this. A lot of people are scared of good mornings. Right? There's a reputation there because of, thanks to Bruce Lee, people are scared of the good morning. Guys like Greg Douchette, because he is a douchebag, telling people not to do good mornings. Okay, this doesn't help. So they were holding back. You know, and then what I would end up happening is have a lifter who, oh no, that's my 10 rep max. That's all I can handle is 185 or 10 on a good morning. Then they test their max and their max is 385, 405. And it's like, you're working with less than 50% per sets of 10. There's no way that's your maxes. And then the glute bridge, because we can just put so much weight on the glute bridge. People don't realize that you can sometimes stack 100 pounds on the glute bridge over what you're doing, and it's not going to be particularly harder. They're just perceiving it as hard because they're like, man, I've got 225 on here for sets of 10. That's a lot. That person can do over 300 pounds for sets of 10. They just haven't tried it yet. They don't realize it. But I've learned to use more reps in reserve. I still use percentages on some of my lifts for my lifters because we need to for honesty and programming purposes. But I do let more of them do reps in reserve. But here's the thing, guys. If we are doing reps in reserve, you have to be honest with yourself. You've got to be careful about that subjective feeling. You need to step back and still compare those to other lifts. If you look at it and go, well, you know, I bench 315, but I'm doing dumbbell presses with 65s for sets of 10. Am I really pushing myself? And here's the other thing. You got to occasionally push some sets to failure. You occasionally got to take some of the supplemental lifts to failure to find out. That's really what you have to do. Because if you start finding out you think you've been doing whatever, 1 rep in reserve with a weight and it's for 9 or 10 reps and you take it to failure and you can do 14, see what I'm saying here? You've been pussyfooting around. And you're not going to make progress. Because how you feel is a lie. And here's the other thing. When I give people reps in reserve, what I don't want to hear from them is, oh, I'm stronger or weaker day to day. That's bullshit. You guys know it. The only time that changes is if it's in a different slot, like you're more fatigued from the work. But if it's your first or your second exercise, and you have to reduce the weight 10%, no. You're holding back. You're not being honest. Because a bad night's sleep will not cause that. You've either lost significant muscle, you didn't eat anywhere near enough food for the last couple days, or you're just being a pussy. You'd figure out which one of those it is. So reps in reserve can work, but you have to have a checks and balances on it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.